my plot bunny. It was a dust bunny. It's become a plot bunny.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to decide. It's taking place in 1931.
Okay.
In an island in Lake Ontario on the Canada side. And I'm trying to decide how much real history to incorporate into this and how much to just make up. Because we've got the Great War, we've got the Halifax explosion going on, and all this stuff, and the Spanish flu epidemic. And I'm just trying to figure out, like, so this is a boarding school for training spiritual mediums during the height of the spiritualist influx that happened during then.
Oh, spiritualism was a thing.
So, like, I have an idea that the people who founded this school were basically, where'd it go? They were disciples of Margaret and Kate Fox and then so the people that were like the first spiritual mediums that would communicate in New York through the Knox. So that's like the thing that exploded spiritualism into place.
Yep.
So I'm like making up people that like knew them and came up to Canada and founded this school. And it's like, how much do I pull from reality and how much do I just make up? Because I don't want to offend actual people who are descendants.
Okay, so I can't remember who said this because I have been reading craft books forever. I was trying to think of which craft book it's even in back there. But one of the first craft books I ever read, when it talked about coming up with the idea for your story, used this acronym M.I.C.E. That M.I.C.E, you have to get your mice in order or the story won't connect to a reader. And M.I.C.E stood for Milieu, idea, characters, and events. And I think that this is really,
What did it stand for again?
It's M.I.C.E. M.I.C.E is Milieu, idea, character, and event.
Thanks.
And that these are the 4 tracks that every story has to run on. It's just one will probably be primary. So, for example, Foundation, which I was talking about before, is an idea story. The idea takes over everything, and there really aren't, like, the characters are subservient to the idea. We only get to learn their names, even if their names are important enough for you to understand the idea that he's arguing for. As much as I don't like talking about Robert Galbraith's work, because of reasons,
Mood.
Harry Potter is a depending on the book, bounces back and forth between a character and a event story. So the first, I would say, 3 books are very definitely event books where the plot dictates everything. You could, in a lot of ways, switch out the characters and the plot would not change. Because the events, the plot is laid down in stone and is kind of on rails, right? Quirrell is going to try to steal the stone no matter what. It doesn't matter who's at the school. It doesn't matter who's trying to stop him. All of that is kind of interchangeable in a lot of ways for the actual bones of that story to take place, right? So that is an event story where it's just barreling down the road. Most apocalyptic stories, monster stories, and the like are event stories. The character ones, I would say more Goblet of Fire, which is him having to deal with his emotions because he's starting to actually have them because she decided to write him as a character in that book. Don't at me, but read the series many times. That's where she went, oh, maybe you should be a full-fledged character. And starts dealing more with his emotions, starts dealing more with the character relationships and whatnot. And character kind of rises up and becomes a bit more primary from that point on in the series. Most modern fiction is character-based. Very little fiction is the first one, and that's milieu-based. So the milieu-based stories, I think very heavily of books that no one has read, and that's why they're not that popular.
Okay, what is Milieu?
Milieu is all the little things.
Yes.
So slice of life fiction. If you're writing slice of life fiction, you are either writing a character story because it's your interest is in that character, or you're writing a milieu story where it's all about the little things in their life, which is the focus, right? But you need to have all four tracks. And the reason I'm going through all this, I do have a point here. The reason I'm going through all this is when you're doing your world building, you need to start dividing it up and going, what needs to be there for just general background radiation, right? What is that milieu? Because this is where a lot of fantasy worlds fall apart because nothing is going on but taking the ring to Mount Doom.
Mm.
And that's because, again, they didn't read the books or even watch the movies. Because in the movies, you can see the kingdoms are divided amongst themselves. There's more going on, even in the films, than that. But a lot of
Beacons are
stories,
finally lit.
like a lot of stories reduce it down to just that one single track, right? Where we're very plot based, right? It's all the events. Evil ring has to be destroyed. Dark Lord can't win. You know. But if you don't have that milieu there, all those little things, like my favorite scene in all three Lord of the Rings books, which is not in the movie, and it makes me sad that it's not in the movie, is when Gimli asks Galadriel for a lock of her hair.
Mm.
And it's because she's literally giving them whatever they want, right? She gives Frodo like a magic light in a bottle that is a preserved star that he can unleash wherever he wants. Like she's literally like giving them their heart's desire. And he's just like, I need to be able to remember with all the bad things that we're going through that something, anything as beautiful as you and what I have seen here exists. May I please just have a lock of your hair?
I think it's in they did release that scene or part of that scene in the
Extended.
yeah.
Maybe in the
Because there is one where Gimli is talking about once they're on the river of, well, what did you ask for? And then he talks about that.
And
So
they have
Okay,
a little
James is saying
flashback.
that it's in the extended. I'm not as
Yeah.
familiar with the extended.
Oh, I
love
only watched the extended.
Yeah, because like it's just so relaxing, and yes, I do fall asleep, and that's how I sleep.
But that moment of milieu tells you so much about the character, right? Because you understand like what this means, right? For an elf to give part of themselves to a dwarf,
Mhm.
right? For a dwarf to find an elf attractive and beautiful and to have anything nice to say about any things that the elvish have. This is not just a, ooh, you pretty woman, me want hair, right?
Mhm.
There's so much meaning built into that. And that's that milieu that we're talking about, that soup that the story takes place in. So the trick is figuring out what that background radiation is that's going on. So if your story is taking place during the Spanish flu, it needs to come up,
Mhm.
or people are going to be like, what?
Yeah, so
Like, how isolated was this island? Right?
not very. It's just a ferry ride from Bath, which is within driving distance from Toronto. So,
But so you need to have some of that background stuff there. But your primary world building,
When I think of
always.
Milieu, I think of the song from the Disney cartoon Beauty and the Beast.
mhm.
There goes the baker with his tray.
Yes.
That is what I think of. Is that in almost pretty much that entire song? So you hear a lot of background characters in it. I need 6 eggs. That's too expensive. Right? But that is like sort of my mnemonic, even though it's not technically, I guess, really a real proper mnemonic, but of what is Milieu. Of it is like that background, busy people in busy town.
It makes you feel like the
another
world
childhood
is
of Richard Scarry and busy town to bring up another background on. But like Richard Scarry was really good at that milieu, in drawing form, and then in the cartoon as well. Of it should be this sort of the background busyness or the activity that people just are going on with their lives, even if we're just talking about woodland creatures and insects in the 100-acre forest. They're still going on with their little lives, and
Those aren't insects. Those are heffalumps.
I mean, heffalumps as well, but there are insects there.
And
who's making the honey, Laura? Who's making the honey?
That's right. There are bees. Okay.
There's bees. Okay, I'm just saying.
Okay.
And going back
important because Pooh would be so sad
without the honey. And going back to Lord of the Rings, like this is like a lot of the humor actually comes out of the milieu of that story, right? The hobbits wondering why they're not having second breakfast and 11 C's and first lunch and second lunch, and like that's all world building. But that's all world building for the milieu. That's world building for the setting. It makes
we
them feel
understand their background lives
right.
through the little things we say. So again, it's that the small hours.
Yep.
You know, when they talk about the small hours or the little hours, when like, so you have big moments in every day and every month, you know, there are these big highlights, right? But the small hours are the things that nobody pays attention to. Like the meal you always have. You always have this, and how do you like it? It's like for the last several months, I like a cup of coffee or chai and a bagel. This is small hours kind of thing, but it does give sort of a peek into what I consider a meal, what I consider a quiet repast. It says a lot about my character without saying anything big.
What are the holidays and how are they celebrated?
Um,
What are the local holidays that
Yeah.
are celebrated? Like we have a festival for
Is
a plant
there
that is
some
not
people
native
who
to around here for reasons I don't understand.
Are there some people who don't celebrate those holidays,
Yes.
and how are they treated?
Yep.
Also, back on the food thing, real quick. Like some people specifically always have like this set meal on this specific day because that's their family dinner, and like so Sunday's family dinner night, and they always have one of these like 5 things, and then you learn that like one of those 5, like there's 5 members of that family, and like that's this person's favorite food, this is another, and another, and another, and another, and they just rotate through everyone's favorite food, and it tells you so much about that family.
And
Sunday night was family movie night, and we would usually watch a Roald Dahl movie, Matilda or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or.
And this is where, especially when you're doing your world building, doing mind maps are really helpful because you put if you're someone like me, you put all 4 of those around and remember for each of the characters where they're connecting in. Because again, if it doesn't show up in your story, it is fun plot and world building that you can do, but no one will ever know unless you are doing something like I am and putting the whole world on World Anvil. So that's how you keep yourself from going into extraneous detail, right? If the Spanish flu is happening, so if you know these historical events, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Spanish flu is happening, the Great War is happening, all of these things, right?
The Halifax explosion.
Sure.
If nobody has any connection with Halifax, if they don't read the local paper, is that going to impact the story? If you can't connect that over to an event or into a character or to an idea that's present in your story, then it's world building you don't have to take the time to do.
Okay.
This is how you fight off the dreaded world builder's disease.
But it's so much fun.
Oh, it is. And I love to give into it.
It's delicious crap.
This is how you keep yourself on track, is if you can't find a place where, why would this be mentioned in my story?
Because somebody died in the explosion and they want to contact the dead through my main character.
And now you have a reason to include it in your story. But especially if you're just world building for story purposes, you have to make sure that all of your effort is going into world building that will appear in the story. Mm-hmm. Unless, again, like I said, someone like me, I can be a little bit freer with my world building because I'm not only putting it up on a site like World Anvil for everyone to read, I'm also making a tabletop role-playing game so that extraneous information may not be extraneous for a game somebody decides to run in this setting.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be a bit more open in the world building that I'm doing. And again, if I can't see how it would lead to a game, I shouldn't waste my time and energy on it. Because again, that's just world builder's disease. And it is a fun one to have, but it takes you to some places. Does that help you kind of figure out how to make those decisions?
So that's the milieu. What's the idea of the character to the event?
Okay, so the idea and theme are cousins. If your story does not have an idea, it will have a theme. If it doesn't have a theme, it will have an idea. It can have both. So, for example, Foundation, since I've been talking about it, is an idea as hero story. Meaning, the whole idea is, are people so predictable that you could design a mathematical model that would predict human history for thousands of years in the future that is accurate? That is what the story is about. All of the plot tension in that story is actually about, is this where the model gets proven wrong or right? It has, like, yeah, there are characters who can live or die, and the TV show's doing a really good job of making that feel important. The book doesn't care. Like, if Hardin dies, well, that just shows that there was a flaw in the mathematical model that needs to be fixed by the next generation at the Foundation so that everything goes on well. Because that's all the book is interested in, because it's the idea that's guiding the story. So when you're, depending on the type of setting that you're doing and the type of world, you'll probably end up having individual themes instead of ideas. Again, they're kind of interchangeable there. Is this a love conquers all story? Is this, the power of friendship kind of a story? Something like that. Those seem to be some of the most popular ones lately. And I wonder why, with the world and the state that it's in.
I don't know what you're referring to.
But that's what you're dealing with the idea. Is your story about a thing? Like, if your story idea could be that, say you're, and this is where a lot of Christian fiction seems odd to people that don't understand what it is. That's ideas hero fiction. That's not whatever genre you think it is. The idea is, my particular brand of this religion is right, and the story is in service of that. So if it's a Christian romance, then of course anything that violates the ethics that that particular branch of the religion has set up for itself will result in suffering for the characters, because it's not the romance that's actually the main point of the story. It's one of the side elements. I'm trying to think of a popular idea. Is hero stories have not been popular for a while, and in a way,
Atlas Shrugged.
Atlas Shrugged is just an idea as hero story. There's a 45-page monologue in that book, which is how I know when people haven't read it, because there's literally a 45-page monologue in that book. One character talks uninterrupted for 45 pages.
That's worse than the Council of Elrond.
Yeah. And every time I bring that up, you can always tell the people who have claimed to have read the book that haven't read the book, because they're like, wait, no. Oh, no. If you've read the book, you can't miss that, because that's
You
the
do
point
not
of the
miss
book.
a 45-page monologue. Unless you were just like, okay, there. It's done.
It's like when
I'm just
people
going to
claim
skip
to
it.
read Moby Dick and don't realize that it starts with like 100 pages of here's how to be a whaler, here's how to tie knots. Because the book actually starts with like 100 pages teaching you how to be a sailor and how to catch whales. And then the story starts.
I think that's why I haven't actually started reading it.
And again, you can always tell who's read the book and who hasn't, because, idea.
I own it. It looks pretty on my shelf. Doesn't mean I'm going to read it.
Right. Les Mis, I think you could very clearly, well, almost anything by Alexander Dumas is an ideas hero story, because he really was a champion of a lot of ideas. Les Mis is him arguing how we should treat the poor and how justice is not just in France. And that's what every element of the story is in service of that, and why it works out the way it is. And really everything by Alexander Dumas, if you want to get into that, we can in some future something, but that's a rabbit hole. He had ideas, y'all. He had ideas. But more than likely, you're just going to have a theme. So if it doesn't tie into your theme, it should be removed. This is the problem with, and I'm going to say it, Robert Galbraith's 7th book in the Harry Potter series, where suddenly, oh no, magic can't just make food appear. Even though it's done it throughout the entire series up to this point, but for plot reasons, we can't have it do that anymore. Well, that's weird because one of the themes of that story is how togetherness and friendship can literally make anything happen. Like that's literally the themes of those books, which means if that is the case, then Hermione should have found a way to waza food because friendship is literally magic in those stories. And that should have been the resolution of that thematically. And it actually challenges the themes of the stories because the world building conflicts with one of the themes there. If that makes sense. So making sure it fits in with your theme or your idea is important. Character, fairly, self-evident. If a character, if none of your characters are going to be sailors, you don't have to develop a strong understanding of how sailing works in your setting or what the fishing industry is like.
Well, in storytelling, a lot of it is you only need to mention what is different.
Mm-hmm.
You do not need to mention what is normal or what is part of our shared reality already. To like if they're eating an apple, you don't have to describe the apple in detail unless the apple is somehow deviating from what we know as an apple. Like
Yeah.
if the apple is red and juicy and tastes like an apple, why are you describing it? It's already the apple that we have in this world. But if this apple is somehow different, if in fact it doesn't taste like apples here, if it tastes more like plums and peaches had a baby, and it's, square shaped naturally, then you describe the difference, not the similarity. So you just like, if sailing is normal, like it's the same in our world as it is in your world that you're describing, you don't need to really describe much unless there's deviations from what we already know about sailing. If they don't sail in a boat, I don't know, they sail on a sod of dirt, then you would describe that. But otherwise, you could just simply say a small boat or a small little skiff. And you wouldn't need to describe it in detail. But if they're sailing on a bunch of dirt, on a raft of dirt, I want to hear descriptive text. Tell me all about this and how this works without dirt falling apart into the water.
It's held together by the vampire within the dirt.
There we go. Yes, it absolutely checks out.
Beautiful.
But I mean, why not? Because that's what readers or viewers or whoever is, the intended audience, that's all they need to know. They need to know how it's different from the shared reality we already live in.
But how do you cater that to a historical fiction where not all education is the same and people don't know?
Okay, so this is where my bias is going to come in here. As much as you want to. Okay. Historical fiction is as big a lie as any kind of fiction is, and all historical fiction, as I believe Glory said in a recent one of her talks, is fantasy fiction. It's straight up fantasy. If you want all of your characters to talk and walk and be like modern people, but it's the 1500s, do it. Nobody will care except for that one person who's really into the 1500s who wanted an historically accurate story. It's your world. You can craft it however you want. Dickinson, which I go to a lot for this, it uses modern music as its soundtrack, an in-world soundtrack, by the way, where they're literally dancing to it at their
and reciting the lyrics to each other.
Quite and stuff, right?
Very modern lyrics.
The vocabulary is extremely modern. Like it's Mean Girls with Emily Dickinson, kind of, in the way
they
that the dialogue
physically move in modern ways.
Yes.
Like they're crouching down and twerking, which is adorable and hilarious
especially
in
those
garb.
big dresses. Those big
yes,
dresses.
Like when they're twerking in these things, and the hoop skirt is like smacking in this one guy's ankles, and it looks like it was not comfortable, but he's trying to, he's paid to be an actor, so he's like, oh, ow, 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 ow. I'm like dying, but in a wonderful way, because
consistency is what the audience cares about. If it's consistently that way, the audience will be like, okay, that's how we're doing this period of American history then. it's because it really depends on your voice and how you want to bring your voice to the work, right? You don't question a, the only time you really question a book is when it breaks your suspension of disbelief. When it all of a sudden something happens and you're like, but that's not how things have been happening.
Yeah, the
Wait.
inconsistency is the problem.
Yeah. So if you want to study all of the regional slang for the time period and really get into that and have fun with that, go for it. I have books over there of slang from various time periods and locations because obsessive. But if that's not what you're wanting to do, then don't bother with it. And I know that's heretical to say, but I really feel this strongly because I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm just going to say the word Bridgerton, sigh heavily, and say there are wonderful videos by Khadija Bo and others. I believe Glory did a whole thing on Bridgerton. There are ways you could have told that story without some of the choices that were made. But
just the gowns anyway. Like why no afternoon gowns? Hem links actually mattered back then, not just socially, but also because they were functional. Just as sleeve links mattered. You're not going to see a woman working in a kitchen with a long sleeve. You're going to see it at most a 3/4 sleeve, but you can also see, just below the elbow sleeve for utilitarian purposes. Fabric is expensive, incredibly expensive, so you don't want to stain it or wear it out. And I'm just like, it's like we've just pretended that none of these people have any concept of utilitarian or functional existence. Okay, whatever.
Yep.
But it's
All
fantasy. Right. Again, like just pointing out,
fantasy.
There is no such thing as a historically accurate historical fictional story. Period. Like it's not a thing. So do not hold yourself to some imaginary standard that is not in existence, okay? No matter what some trolls on the internet tell you, ignore them, don't feed them. Historical fiction is always written for a modern audience and therefore can never be historically accurate because people change and society changes and technology changes, and you need to write for your modern readers so they understand it, and not for how readers 100, 150, 200, 75 years ago, whatever, what they would understand and what we understand now as readers are dramatically different. So do not worry about historical accuracy. Write for your modern readers to satisfy them and to entertain them.
That is awesome. And you're 100% right on that.